Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast. Today we are taking authentic portraits. So let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to helping you grow your photography skills. Raymond interviews the world's top photographers in their field to ask questions that will get you taking better photos today. Now, with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodger fan, and Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome back to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. As always, I am your host, Raymond Hatfield. I'm excited this week for this week's interview. This week, I actually get to talk to a personal hero of mine, and it is just a complete joy of an interview. So if you haven't had a second to look down at the podcast timeline for how long this interview is, you'll see that it is more than an hour and a half. It is just completely jam-packed, and it's funny, Chris is one of those people who, today's guest, Chris Orwig, he's totally one of those people who, whenever we talk, I always get to thinking about how long we've been friends and all the fun adventures that we've been on together and the stories that we've shared. And then I snap out of it and remember, oh man, this is the first time that I've ever interacted with Chris. He just has that personality that just invites deep conversation, so much more so than just rapid firing off questions. And we got so deep into certain questions on several occasions that I actually had to throw half of my questions out simply because we ran out of time. So as I said, this interview is jam-packed. You are going to love this. And I know that you're going to feel the same way about Chris. So every week I save a portion of the interview that is focused more towards business, just for premium members of the podcast. So this week, premium members are going to learn how Chris got his very first portrait session, why no one will ever hire you to do your best work, why Chris still gets butterflies before a shoot. I do too, I gotta be honest. And how to develop your one-on-one rapport with your subjects, and it is just perfect for introverts. So if you want to hear all of that from Chris Orwig and more photography business information delivered straight to your ears every single week, then become a premium member. You can sign up by heading over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and clicking the premium membership button at the top. So that is it. Let's go ahead and get on into this week's interview with Chris Orwig. Today's guest is Chris Orwig, a portrait photographer from the much sunnier than Indianapolis right now, California. He is known for his ability to create portraits that are truly authentic and very captivating. And today I'm really excited to dive into, find out more about kind of the process of capturing the human essence in a single frame. So Chris, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, super fun to be here and fun to get a chance to chat. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for this podcast in particular for a few reasons. One, because at the beginning of the year, I asked members of the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group who they want to hear from. And several times your name came up. And I know that we had been trying to get you on the podcast and you're a very busy guy. And we finally set this up. But for reason number two, I was just thinking about this the other day. It must have been 9 years ago, right after I moved to Indianapolis and decided to take photography seriously. I had no idea how to use Lightroom. And I went on lynda.com and I searched for a Lightroom tutorial. And you yourself taught me how to use Lightroom 3. And because of that confidence that I had using Lightroom 3, I feel like I am where I am today because I was a very cheap photographer and didn't want to spend any money. But my wife was like, no, just do it. Just dive in, spend the money, do it, and you'll be happy for it. And I'm very happy that I did. And so kind of all of this is thanks to you. So Chris, thank you so much.
Oh, that is so great. That makes me so happy. So I appreciate that. Yeah. And it's funny, like Lightroom 3, they don't use numbers anymore. They used to do that with Photoshop and Lightroom. And I always wondered, what would they do, like Lightroom 33 or so, like when would it end? And so now they it's CC. But anyway, that's really fun. And that is a great thing, as you know, from doing your podcast too, the teaching and sharing, the beauty of it and why we do all this is those connections. And also, you never know, and you might help someone else out. And part of that's just because so many people have helped us out. It's a nice way to keep that circulating, so.
Yeah. It's a great way to look at kind of the world that way. It's weird because when you're a kid, you're always told, especially now that we're around the holidays, like it's more about giving than it is receiving. And when you're a kid, you have such a limited life experience that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But as you get older, you start to see how things piece themselves together. And I've told other people this before. If I could live to like 500 years old, I would definitely do that, just to be able to see how everything is so connected to each other.
Yes,
but in this very small window that I've had on Earth, I've been very fortunate to kind of see how some of those strings work. So once again, you are part of my string.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. And it comes to mind too, is someone was just asking me about my friend Greg, and because I had mentioned his name, and they said, well, who's Greg? And I said, well, he's the reason why I have a vocation and a career. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And it's a long, winding story, but literally without him in my life, I wouldn't have any of this, and be sitting here talking to you. So it's so wonderful to have people like that, and it's great to, I don't know, keep that circulating, and so anyway, so it's fun. So I appreciate it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I mentioned there in the intro that obviously you're very well known for your portraits. You teach about portrait photography. You've been doing it for 20 years now. Is that right?
Yeah.
And all of this kind of started from after a car accident when you were on your skateboard.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. Keep going.
Can you tell me who you were before the accident, and then kind of how the accident changed you into who you are today?
Yeah. I was much more self-absorbed. I think I saw, I'd never really been injured physically, so I kind of saw injury as weakness. I saw kind of my worldview was like, just tough it out and get over it. And so I think then afterwards, it gave me a new empathy, which as a portrait photographer, you kind of can't be a portrait photographer without empathy, right? A friend of mine, Travis, put it this way. He said, in portraiture, not in portraiture, but he just said, what we want to do is we want to look so deeply at someone that we can see ourselves. So in life, he was saying, but also in portraiture that, so for me, when I'm photographing someone, whether it's a billionaire, or yesterday I was photographing a picture for the Detroit Tigers, a famous athlete, or a little kid or homeless person, is to look and to see that person empathetically and say, while I've never been homeless, I do know what it's like to feel like I don't belong. And that lack of, or that kind of understanding or attempt to understanding is where a good portrait comes from. And same thing with baseball. Like this baseball player, he's awesome. Like it was so fun, man. And I don't know anything about baseball, but to begin to see him not as that idea or that role that he plays, but as this person, and like, well, what does that mean? And how do you handle the pressure, and what, you find common ground. Maybe that's it, right? I mean, that's what you do in your weddings too, right? You're not like, well, this is bride A or groom, 303, whatever. It's like, no, this is a person with dreams and hopes and aspirations and fears and family, all this stuff. And when you connect with them in that way, that makes good photography, people photography. So anyway, this is a really long answer, but I think before that experience, before any kind of suffering, it's hard to make good portraits. But most portrait photographers have suffered, have leaned into their suffering, have paid attention to that, and that is where they then find light and beauty and hope and all of those things. And it doesn't have to be dramatic like a car accident. Sometimes it's just as simple as something difficult that's happened in life. So yeah, so it's made me appreciate that stuff. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Absolutely. Okay. In fact, my follow-up question there was going to be, I've never been in a car accident. Is good portrait photography something that I could do? But I think that you kind of summed it up there at the end. We all kind of deal with things differently, and if we have found pain in anything, we should be able to find that empathy in somebody else. That's really interesting. Really interesting. So, what was it about? Because it was, and I know that you have a very long history in photography, which is why I'm kind of adding these little pieces of your life. But it was your father who gave you your first camera, right?
Yes.
Okay. So can you kind of walk me through what that camera meant for you at the time?
Yeah, it was back in the era when getting a camera was a big deal. There was no Costco to buy one from. You would go to a camera store, and so I think that was kind of momentous, which I think is fun when people rediscover that experience, because we all have a camera in our pocket we take for granted, and we kind of think it's a pretend camera, but it's actually a real camera. But then when you save up and buy a camera, you're like, I think the person who saves up and buys a camera is so excited about it. It's like this moment that that can still kind of happen, and that can really fuel your creative growth. So that's what happened for me. And I think a big part of that was that it gave me a reason to get out into the world. So it's a sort of the passport thing the camera does. And then it became an instrument for collecting wisdom. It still is, I have a couple cameras sitting here, but it's still my way to learn about the art of living. I mean, that's everything for me. And when I was in that particular season of life, there were certain lessons I was, quote, looking for. Now in this season, there are other lessons, but that still continues all the way through for me. So it's kind of funny. I'm not a photographer, maybe in a traditional sense. I kind of play the role of a professional photographer, but deep at heart, I am an amateur, man. Like I love it. I love the fact that, like, yesterday I got to hang out with this baseball player. We became friends. We're deeply connected. I gained all this life wisdom like that. I would do it anyway. It's kind of a thing. And so yeah, it all kind of came from that early experience, I think, of like, wow, camera, and that's, this is kind of a tangent, but
I love it.
Here we go. Ready for a tangent? Because we were talking about kids before we started recording. We both have kids. We each have a kid similar age and others, but parents will often ask me, because I'm a photographer, they'll say, what camera should I buy my kid? And I always say I'm the wrong person to ask. And I try to just sort of dodge the question, because I actually don't think kids should have cameras. This is totally weird. Yeah.
As my son, who's 7, asked for a camera for Christmas, I'm really excited to hear this answer.
Yeah. And I think if a kid has the interest, I say go for it. Mm-hmm. And that's the same kid who asked for a violin. Like, what is it about the violin? Okay, well, let's explore that. But what I think burdening someone who's too young with something that's really expensive and will break, because that's the reality of being a kid and having something. I've seen too many parents give a kid $1,000 camera. It breaks, and their spirit is crushed. They feel guilty. They feel shame. They're embarrassed. All these things, and then they lose the spark. Mm-hmm. And I don't want any kid to lose the spark. I mean, that's why in art classes in elementary school, you use crayons and pencils and paints, and you get your clothes a little dirty, and it's like okay to experiment. And so it's not that I don't want kids to have cameras, but it's more just considering, for certain kids, there's a right time to get the camera. Mm-hmm. And at least for me, that was a little bit later in life. Like, I did photography in high school. I was horrible. I mean, I've looked back at those images. They were like the worst ever. I found this folder of my old photographs, and I thought maybe there's some hidden gem, some hidden talent. And I was like, no, I had none, zero. And I've always had to work for it. And it wasn't some gift from the gods. It was more searching, scratching, digging. And I had to live enough life and then get the camera. Does that make sense? So I just want kids
Absolutely.
to be kids and live life and do all that. And so, and maybe your 7-year-old will have a blast and it's the right time. And there are some that are a little more durable, or, you know, sometimes kids get Polaroid cameras. Those are really fun and still tactile and tangible. But I want kids to be creative over the long haul.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I'm pretty sure that it's probably the same case for my son. Is he asked for one of those Fuji Instax cameras.
Yes, those are amazing.
I have several, and I take them out and use them all the time with family functions. And we have like I take all the Instax and like hang them on the wall in our home so they can kind of see a timeline. And he likes that idea, but I think he wants the camera more just because our neighbor, his friend, has the same camera.
Yeah,
and I think that's really the only reason.
Yes.
So yeah, like you said, it's diving deeper, try to find that reason behind it as to why.
And
but regardless, I don't think he's going to get one.
Okay. But even
I hope that he doesn't hear this episode.
Okay. Even that though, he, you know, with those cameras, they're getting a feel for the artifact of the print. I mean, I think that's beautiful and wonderful. Mm-hmm. It's more maybe the kid's a little older, because then once they have the camera, then they're going to learn all the software, and it's not necessarily bad. And I think certain kids should do it. But I don't know. I just maybe I'm just going to flip to a different subject. I'm a surfer, right? I live in a surf town. So plenty of surf dads push their kids into surfing really hard, too young. I have a number of friends this happened. The kid then wipes out, hits their head on the surfboard, and they will never surf again in the rest of their life. And I just think that's a bummer, you know? And so as parents, there's more like, with my kids, it's more like, let's give them opportunities and let's help them explore things. But I don't want to shove them into anything. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to be the photographer dad that's like doing that. If they come down here and want to grab one of my cameras and play with it, I'm game, you know, but I'm not going to push it.
Oh man, this is totally off subject, but I kind of struggle with that right now with our son Charlie, who's in piano.
Okay.
Because he loves to play by himself, so we got him in piano lessons because he asked for it.
Yeah.
And now it kind of seems as if like piano lessons are a struggle for him. Like it's just like, oh, it's a chore, you know, that he's got to do this. But because he has those piano lessons, we're like, well, you got to go practice. You got to go.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. But I've thought the same thing about photography, because I don't want to push him into something that just because I'm interested in it.
Yes.
So that's a really interesting perspective. But
just to throw a monkey wrench, my mom forced me to take piano my whole life, and I'm so grateful. So there's that side too, right?
Oh man, yeah.
I don't know. You know,
it doesn't make it any easier.
It doesn't. No, it doesn't. What do we do as parents? I don't know.
Why can't there just be like one book on how to parent perfectly?
Seriously, if you write that book, tell me, and I would buy it.
Millionaire.
Yeah.
So when you first got that camera, you were really excited to go out and take these photos. Did you start with portraits, or did you just start with whatever you found?
Yeah, I think like most photographers, I'm sure a lot of folks listening can relate to this. When you kind of get the bug, you photograph everything. You know, you're like, oh my gosh, bottle cap, hubcap, sign, a leaf. So I did that, and more just had no intent on. I didn't even really know why I was doing that. I think it was just a response to, you know, a creative spark, and you're like, I'm just going to follow that, you know, wherever that goes. And then eventually, as I moved my way through photography and tried out a lot of different things, I kept coming back to the stuff that I love most. It's always related to people. So I would say things like, you know, there's a lot of beautiful places to travel to, or wonderful places in the world to live, but it's always the people that make the place. And so it's like, oh, that's like a photograph of, like, I'm just going to make this up because I've never been there, Greece is amazing, but I wouldn't hang it on my wall unless maybe my aunt, who's a painter who paints in Greece, and I photographed her, and she's small in the frame, and then there's that landscape with those dome roofs and the water. I would love that picture. Does that make sense? So sort of
Absolutely.
paying attention to that intrinsic, like, what do I actually love? I love landscapes. I love travel. I mean, I love food. I love sport. I love all these things, but ultimately that. And then I also realized I'm a real one-on-one guy. So I can do the whole, like, have a bunch of people over to our house and have a backyard barbecue. But in that situation, I always thrive when I have the one-on-one conversations. Does that make sense? And portraiture is a real one-on-one type of photography.
Right.
Versus, I would say, weddings, for you do one-on-one, but you also have to do a lot of group stuff.
There can be a lot of that. Yeah. For sure. So when you, is the question that you're asking yourself when you first got started, would I hang this on my wall? Like, is that the gauge?
Yeah, no, that wasn't that. It was, I think, more, maybe more, what do I need? It was probably out of neediness. It was out of healing. It was out of, and I think for some people, that's why they go into landscape. Their life is cluttered and complicated, and they get in the landscape, and it's just like peace and serenity. And so the excuse to kind of photograph the landscape is really an excuse for healing.
Wow. And I had never thought about it like that. And you know what's interesting is that, like, every landscape photography group on Facebook is just like nothing but like the most technical, like, has to be perfect, like, as almost as I always feel as if they're like introducing more chaos than there needs to be in a photo. So that's a really interesting way to look at it, as if they need that calmness out in nature, but then once they get back, they have to reintroduce that chaos to create something that they're comfortable with. I don't know. I'm just totally speculating there.
No, it could be, or it could be something just about the the duality of photography too, right? In all forms of photography, where you with a portrait, you want someone to look good, but at the same time you don't. Like, if I like a portrait of you smiling right now, just be like, all right, that's fine. You look like a happy guy. But if I would want something deeper, but I also wouldn't want you crying. You know what I mean? So I think in landscape photography too, you do need that technical precision, and Ansel Adams obviously was all about that, but with emotion, so technique without emotion is flat and uninteresting. Emotion without technique is also, to me, kind of, it's just so abstract, it's uninteresting, so I think it's the duality of the nature of photography, right?
Wow, this is getting deep real quick. Oh. And I love it. As I was saying before we got on, this isn't a very technical podcast. We don't talk too much about like shutter speed and aperture and ISO and stuff. So this is exactly the kind of stuff that really interests me, because we're just so different as people, that I know that somebody right now is listening and thinking like, that is it. That is the thing that I need right there. And that it's really going to change the way that they shoot. So, but kind of exploring more of that technical side of things. When you first started photography, it was with film. It was just shooting the things that you saw in front of you. What was the hardest part about photography, and maybe the technical side, for you to learn and understand?
Yeah, the hardest part, when you first said that before technique, what came to mind instantly was some negative feedback I got. Like, I shot these photographs I was so excited about. I felt like I poured my soul into them. I felt like I accomplished something heroic. I was like the guy who ran his first marathon, arms up, just, yes, this, and I showed them to someone who was a really accomplished photographer, and he said, I created photographs like that when I first started out. And I was just like, you know, I don't know, probably curse word flashed through my mind. I just felt so hurt. And so I think the hardest thing was that, it's staving off initial feedback. And I'm sure people listening get that too, because the reality is you have to, your initial efforts. Let's go to our kids for a second. They bring home the drawing, watercolor, crayon, or something, and we're just like, yes, this is amazing. And we need that as humans. Mm-hmm. We need our sketches to be celebrated. And so not having that and kind of feeling isolated in that way, that was hard. as far as the camera technical side goes, I've always been a minimalist, and my technique is laughably simple. So it's aperture priority mode, shoot at a shallow depth of field. So I always go as low as possible. I've never bought a lens that had an aperture setting of higher than 2.8 that I've ever liked or kept. I've always sold those. So I'm always shooting really shallow. So I aperture priority, really shallow. And then if I need to change my exposure compensation. So, and I taught at this super technical school where people would say, if you don't shoot on manual mode, there's something wrong with you. Like, it was like, you were shamed, you were belittled, and I just stuck with it. I'm like, I'm not going to let the technique side phase me, and I think the iPhone, obviously, or mobile photography has done that. If people really stop to think about it, it's like the first Kodak Brownie camera, which their tagline was, you push the button and we'll do the rest. And so that's all we do now. And there's liberation to that. And so, so technically, strangely, I didn't have a tough time with the camera because I just used simple settings. It was more being around people who are really good photographers and then having high goals for myself that I wasn't hitting. There are times when I've wept after a photo shoot where I photographed someone important to me, or just I knew this was the only chance and I missed the shot, and I just will go through the image. It's not like, oh, that's too bad, I missed focus, or my exposure or composition or something wasn't right, but where I'm just like, I blew it. I missed the moment. I lost that. So I don't know why did I say that, but I think maybe just that it matters to me, and I think it matters to those listening. That's why we do photography. It matters. We wouldn't do it if we didn't care about it. And so the thing I always tell people about that is, you're just gonna have to shoulder the weight of a lot of disappointment from other people. You're going to cross the finish line like, yes, my first marathon. And someone's going to be like, oh, but you only did it in 5 hours, or something, and you're like, I don't care. Do you understand? Like, I used to not even be able to run a mile, but, and just that photography. And I think that's why podcasts and things like this are so great, is when you connect with the community, you realize, oh, we're all in this together and we're all learning, and there's so much to learn, and we can celebrate each other, and that it isn't competition, and that bad pictures aren't it's not a failure. It's more of, okay, let's learn from that. And even crying about missing a photograph, that's probably a great thing to have happen, because that means that you care enough about it. If you just are apathetic, then you probably won't be a good photographer.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So, in your own words, what would you say is kind of the job description of a portrait photographer? Is it simply having empathy and using it to see somebody?
Yeah, I would say, first and foremost, it's not the picture. It's always about connecting with the person. Someone who's willing to have their portrait made is willing, to be vulnerable and honest and real, because it's not fashion. I mean, I think there are fashionable portraits, there are headshot portraits, but portrait kind of in the pure sense of the word, I think is a little bit of a revelation, a little bit of honesty. So it's just honoring that person, really, and just creating that space. And I would say it's similar for, let's say if I was in your town for some reason, I said, hey, I'm going through a tough patch, a rough patch in life. Can we go to coffee? I think your role would be to basically say, sure, and listen, and just create the space for a friend to talk. And if you were able to reflect back something like, what I'm hearing you saying is that these 3 things are really difficult, what I would probably say is, oh my gosh, like, you nailed it, equivalent of, you nailed the portrait. Like, my wife's going to love this image, and whenever there's something like that, when the person says someone close to them will like the photograph, that's when I think the image works. It has to look like them in the truest sense of the word. But more than that, it's just being a human. It's caring for them wherever they are. And sometimes people, I found, where they are is they're not ready or willing to go deep. That's fine. Sometimes I'm that way. Sometimes I just need to be shallow. You ask me how I'm doing, I say fine, and that's a lie. And I need to honor that lie. You know what I mean?
Of course.
Yeah. So wait, can I tell a workshop story?
Yes,
This is
please.
a fun one. Okay, so I'm in a workshop, teaching a workshop, and I have this person I invite in to photograph, and he's a Broadway performer, awesome guy, just super talented, kind of handsome, striking, musical, the whole thing, right? He's one of these great people. And I'm kind of talking about how we can create strong portraits in a simple way. He's actually on the cover of my book. Let me see I don't know if you can see that, but it's that guy right there. And I'm just trying to get to know him. I ask him about his life and where he's from and his family. And at one point he talks about his mom having MS. And I say, wow, with a mom who has MS, what's that like? Or what, just kind of an open-ended question. And he pauses and he says, it's really hard. And he starts to tear up. And one of my workshop attendees said, as like the tears are literally about to like fall out of his eyes, says, what was your favorite Broadway show to perform in? And he was just so uncomfortable with that emotion. And he was kind of like, Cats, or I don't know what he said, one of the ones that he'd been in.
Just a default answer. Yeah.
And then later we talked about it, and she said, I felt like you were manipulating him. And I said,
she said this to you?
Yeah. And I said, well, let's talk about that, because I asked an open-ended question. I could have said, what's it like having a mom with MS? He could have said, it's difficult, but the thing is, I love my mom. He could have answered that way, but he, for some reason, in that moment, was being very vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And I think as a portrait photographer, my job isn't to like, if he says it's really difficult, for me to say, well, how difficult? Like really, show with your eyes how painful it is to have a mom with this horrible disease. But if he's going to say that, just give him some time and say thank you, and say take a breath, and then create a portrait. Now, it could create a meaningful portrait. And so I think it's that honoring of that space. That's what the portrait photographer does. Is they create space, and they don't manipulate, because that's why I go to the coffee thing. Like if you and I went to coffee, you wouldn't manipulate the situation to be like, well, how bad was your dark night of the soul? You would say, well, tell me about it. How's it going? Or what was that like? Or what are the difficult things? So I think that's what makes great portraits, is that kind of creating space, being open, and honoring that person. So yeah.
So I love that example, and I'm thinking about going to a coffee shop with you and how much I would love that, and obviously being able to chat and hear your story.
By the way. Yeah.
If you ever come to Indianapolis, or we go,
are you
going to imaging this year? If you're going to imaging,
yes, I'm going to imaging.
Let's make that happen.
Okay.
Let's make that happen.
Deal.
So when you have a chat with somebody in front of them, it's easy to commiserate with them, right?
Yes,
and empathize,
yes.
and say, oh man, that is tough. But when it comes to a portrait, so in this situation that you had where he says, man, it's really tough with my mom, how would you, I don't want to say use that information, but how does that change the portrait, how does that change the outcome of the portrait? If because earlier you said, you don't want to be like, now tell me with your eyes that it's tough, so how does that affect it?
Yeah, I think, and that happens to be like a difficult situation example. There's other, I think, situations maybe where, let me go to, I'm going to go to photographing Kelly Slater. He's a world champion surfer, famous guy, In that photo shoot, I got to know him, and he said, Chris, I'm kind of embarrassed that most of my life I confused the idea of Kelly Slater and the person of Kelly Slater.
Wow.
Yeah, which is like, it's kind of like junior high all over again, right? There's this idea of who we are.
Very much, yeah.
Like people think you're this person, but then there's who you really are. Do I play the person, not just junior high, maybe a lot of life, do I play the person they want me to be, or do I be really me? So I think when something like that's revealed, it's you go there and you talk about identity, and then I share as well. So there has to be a reciprocal thing. So I talk about my own identity. So it's not like, wow, you're weird, or you're a celebrity, so I can't relate to that. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, like I totally get it. So anyway, when those emotions come up, I think it's that. And then how that affects the picture is just that mutuality, that collaboration of, or even just gratitude, like with that, like his name's Bryce. Is Bryce like thank you for being willing to go there and share that. I mean, it's so funny in life, especially with life and success. It's easy to just emphasize our successes and all the cool plays you've been in and shows. And for me as a photographer, it's easy to emphasize all the good stuff. But I got to tell you, like I didn't say this in this moment, but something like this could happen is like right now, I feel so isolated and kind of lonely because of all that success. And then you could talk about that. And then you could say, okay, let's take a breath. Let's do a portrait. And then I would have him look down, take a breath, and then look back. And all of those layers would be present in the image. And I think probably the same thing is true in wedding photography. The times when I have done weddings, it's like all the layers and preparation is present in everyone who's there. So much is built up to that scene. And that's what makes it good. It's not just like a pretty picture and pretty dresses and pretty flowers. Like those pictures are easy. Or a handsome person. You photographed a handsome person, it's like, or a beautiful woman. And it's like, kind of shallow. Right. And so looking for layers. So I guess, I don't know if that answers the question, but letting all that stuff come into the image, but not overpower it. Here it is for me. I sat in on an acting 101 class my friend teaches. He teaches at college level. And I was like, bro, can I like come to class one day? He's like, sure. And so there I was. And I thought, because I'd never taken an acting class. And he said the most profound thing. They were working on emotions. And he was teaching them that when you need to be angry as a character, whatever it is, you need to feel 10, a level 0 to 10. You need to feel anger at level 10. But you can only give us like a level 7 because overacting or bad acting is 10. And then Brad Pitt, he'll show you he's angry, but he's giving it to you at a 2. It's like the subtle way his eye moved or something. And you're like, oh my gosh, like it just conveyed like a million things. Bad actors, bad portraits are always overdone with emotion. And so trying to, and what I was saying, even with a tough emotion, allow it sometimes to get there, but then reel it in, take a breath, settle a little bit. And maybe there'll be a time when I photograph someone who's weeping. I've never done that yet. A lot of those pictures, actually, if there is heavy emotion, I don't share them because I feel like I need to honor the moment. Unless the person kind of says, I don't even ask them. I just don't share it, Same thing if we went to coffee and you shared something deep about your life, I wouldn't like
be like, now it's my turn.
Yeah, or post on Instagram like, well, so-and-so told me that he really wrestles with this topic. It's like, so anyway, I do think there's also a sacredness is maybe what I'm getting at. As portrait photographers, we are entrusted with story and we need to treat that as sacred because I think it is. And then also be mindful of when and where and how to share it. And that some stories, even though it's a great picture, doesn't give you justification to share.
Wow. Oh man, that line right there really hits home. I think as a wedding photographer, we're always trying to come up with ways, what do I write for captions for social media? And what do I put here and what do I put there? And there's been times where, you go to a wedding and there's a lot of stress and maybe there's some family drama and that comes through in the photos. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they still get married and they had a good time, or at least it appears that way. Right. So you kind of want to share that, like, even though there was a buildup, it all turned out well. But, now I've often thought, like, I shouldn't even, like, this is just the cheap way out. This is just like, oh yeah, their wedding day was very tough, but they got through it. They got married, they had fun. And that I should really look deeper into that, because that's not really my story to share. Right. It's their story to share.
It is their story to share. And if they shared it, it would probably be funny or beautiful, or,
of course,
like, because they would be like, you will not imagine, these 5 things went wrong, and then this, and then I had a total meltdown. Because if someone says, let's just say, I'm going to say wedding, if I say on my own wedding day, I had this whole meltdown, and I realized, and I tell that story, people are going to be captivated. But if someone else tells a story like Orwig had this meltdown, it's like,
not only am I thinking, wow, that guy is crazy, but now I'm not going to trust this guy with any stories of mine.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's storytelling. Yeah. And storytelling, I heard someone, this National Geographic photographer, talk about it. She was asked, what is story in one word? And she said connection. And I thought, I think that's true. I think if I had to distill story, it's because if you don't connect to the story, whether it's a Disney story or a photographic story, there's no connection. There's just nothing's resonating, nothing's there. And so that's, just trying to figure out how do we connect, and then how do we share that, and how and when and why. And that to me is the beauty of portraiture. And then meanwhile, the portrait photographer, or any kind of photographer, you learn these lessons. Like in weddings, even, you learn, like, man, I photographed a wedding recently, and the father of the bride, he got up to give his talk, and I have 3 daughters, and I was like, okay, I'm probably about 15 years away from giving that talk or more. I don't know. But I was like, I want to be like that guy. Like, he just set an example I had never experienced. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I got to journal about this. What was it? How did he talk? Everything. So I think the photographer not only is able to create pictures, but gains wisdom. And that's the beauty of why we do this thing. And same thing if you photograph a tree. I mean, the photographer who really photographs a tree really thinks about branch and leaf and leaves that fall, and how trees are always growing, and roots and the root systems. And, because they're just sitting there kind of listening to the tree almost, and getting to know it. And they gain things that you wouldn't gain if you just walked by a tree. I think poets probably gain a lot too, writers, because they really look and listen. So anyway, that's the beauty of it. That's why we do it.
So when it comes to that connection, though, when it comes to storytelling, right?
Yes.
And gaining that connection, how do you ensure that when you show up, you're able to make that connection and capture the portrait that you want to take? Or I guess let me ask a follow-up question to that. Is that, do you go into a situation having a preconceived idea of what the portrait is going to be, or do you let it organically arise?
Yes. And you're so good at keeping me on track, by the way, and this on track. It's amazing, because I'm going all over the place. It's really fun to talk. But I do think preparing ourselves is a huge part of portraiture, meaning there's a term in yoga, and I don't practice yoga. I've done it a few times, but I love the term, which is namaste. And the one definition I've heard of that, there's a lot, but one that I like is the light in me recognizes the light in you. And that there's a lot of other traditions and history, or ideas behind that. We project reality out into the world. Basically, what we see, what's inside of us, and so whatever's inside of us is essentially what we notice in others. And I mean, I think the simple example of that is, you can be in a really bad mood, or have just received horrible, because I do books, right? Let's say I just received a horrible book review, and I can walk past a friend who's just stoic, no expression. And I can be like, what is that guy's problem? Like, why is he so upset with me? But it has nothing to do with him. I could have then just received the best news in the world, maybe just got this huge job, and I'm so excited, or something fun happened. I see the same friend with the stoic expression. I'm like, man, he's so calm and still. Like, I want to be like that, right? It has nothing to do with him. It's all about me. So the self-preparation for a portrait photographer is huge. It's like getting all those things to calm down, all those crazy voices in your head, which have to do with technique and mastering your technique. So you're like, okay, I have a vision for what I'm going to do, how I'm going to shoot, what lenses. If I bring a whole bag of lenses and I'm kind of like, I don't know, and this, then I'm too confused to even see the picture, right? I also I want to have some idea about the person. I want to have some sense of their spirit, or their perspective, or their character. If I don't have anything, which happens a lot, I photograph strangers all the time, I look for little threads. Little threads might be something like photographing someone and say, and also I should say, vision for me is always a strong character portrait. And so what I mean by that is, this isn't flashy, this isn't sexy, this isn't fashion, this isn't This isn't journalism. Journalists would step away and just let the person walk by. I'm engaging and I'm trying to create something there. And what I want is some kind of characteristic, something genuine, something honest, something true. So yes, there's the vision. But if I don't know the person, I don't know what the character is. I don't know what is honest. I don't know what is true. So I just look for little threads by way of questions, which can simply be like, photographed someone 2 days ago. I was like, oh, he had a little tattoo right here, a moon, half moon. And I was like, interesting tattoo. Like, what's the story? There's always a story.
Always,
you know. Some of them are great, some of them aren't. And she didn't actually want to tell the story. She was like, I got it with someone. It's, you know, and I was like, oh, cool. And so I tried something else, where are you from, or how long have you lived here? Just those kind of things. And you get these little pieces. And I guess maybe it's more particular story. I was photographing at this event. I'm sponsored by Sony. It was a Sony event. They had models there that you could photograph to test out cameras. The models are decked out, fashionable, they're kind of striking, and intimidating to me as a portrait photographer, because I'm like, wow, this person's, I don't know, so striking. And I also know from being a teacher, the more beautiful, more striking, more you admire someone, usually the worse the photograph, because you think that because they're beautiful or handsome, I'll create a good photograph, and then you don't think like a photographer, and your skill level drops. You're kind of relying on them to make the picture for you. So anyway, there I am, this person, and she's really tall, and I just start talking to her about, I kind of mentioned I have 3 daughters and name their ages. And I was like, gosh, you're really tall. Cause I noticed I had to kind of tiptoe to capture the portrait. And I said, when did you hit your height? Were you young? And she was like, oh, I was like 6th grade. And I said, was it hard? Oh, you can imagine the names people called me. It was horrible. But then when sports came along, it was amazing. She kind of lit up. She was this person, right? And I was like, oh, what sports? And it was like, wow, it's volleyball. And I said, oh, do you still play? She said, no, I broke my back. I was playing college volleyball, broke my back, got dropped from my parents' insurance plan. And now I have to come up with a way to pay for all my medical bills. So I'm modeling. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Whoa,
right.
You just learned a lot about this person, more than just like, this is a beautiful person who's here to be in front of my camera. And then that's it.
Yeah. And so with that, did I have a vision for like a character portrait of a backstory of a model who had her back broken and now is trying to pay for medical bills? No, I had no clue. And I don't think we can ever really know these kind of invisible stories, so to speak. But I search for them, just they're really simple questions. And if they don't want to talk, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But she offered that. I said, wow, that's heavy. I get that. That's a tough thing. And you seem like you're someone who has overcome a lot of adversity. Let's, think about that for a second. What did I say? I said something like, well, think about people who have helped you overcome this adversity. Close your eyes, think about them, and then come back and look at my camera. And it's like, bam, portrait's like mind blowing. It's so good. You know what I mean? Like, I am just like, oh my gosh, you just gave me this gift of like, of overcoming adversity, and I want to overcome adversity. And, I'm just like so excited. And here it is, a fashion model. Right. And so I think that is the art or arc of good portraiture, at least for me. And that's the stuff that I enjoy. And that's where I'm like, wow, I learned a lot about how quickly I judge people just by their looks or their height. And how I need to remember we all have stories, and how I also am just grateful to the camera that it taught me, gives me these little gifts of wisdom, so anyway, so there you have it. So do I have a vision? Yes and no.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. So, but I want to know, let's go back to your first portrait session, right? Okay. Say your first paid client.
Yes. Okay.
Did you find that you had the same level of interaction, or was this something that grew over time? And how did it turn out? Hey, Raymond here, and if you're listening to this, you are listening to the free version of today's interview. If you want to hear more from today's guest about the business of photography, consider becoming a premium member. Every week, guests answer questions about products, pricing, packages, and so much more. that will help your growing photography business thrive. This is the next logical step. To join, head over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and click the premium membership button at the top of the page. Change you. There you go. Oh man. Yeah, absolutely. That's one of those things that is so powerful to learn. And once you experience that firsthand is when I feel like you can truly become the photographer that you're meant to be, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think that is it. I think, and I think that the pay just allows you to be more of yourself.
Right.
And if the pay doesn't, let's say, you're kind of, and what I mean more of yourself, like it, I think it's like any job that we get maybe in life, but when the pay kind of, because pay is just energy, right? It's just like, now I get to do more of this thing. Yes. And if I'm getting to do more of the thing that I truly love and it resonates with people and the results resonate, everyone wins. But if I'm getting paid to do this thing that isn't really me and I'm kind of faking it, you can pull that off for a little while, but eventually it all falls apart.
Very much so.
And so that's where because I see students do that. I see them, get so excited or get overwhelmed or whatnot. And maybe what I mean by that is my first paying job or any paying job, I'm still dreadfully nervous every time. I mean, I don't know why. I feel like I should be over it by now, but I am not.
Right?
I'm thinking like I keep thinking like I might blow this. I might totally not get the shot. There's no guarantee. Photography, there's never a guarantee. It doesn't matter how much of a quote master of the craft you are. There's no guarantee. And I just have learned to lean into that. That's okay. And if I'm photographing someone who I am really, really nervous to photograph, like a famous person, I try to not be impressed by fame, but sometimes I am. Because you know what I mean? Like some famous people I don't really care about. But then there's those ones where I'm like, oh my gosh, my whole life, if I could meet one person, it's this person.
Who is it?
Well, the first one that came to mind right now, as you said, that was Bono from the band
Bono,
U2.
Yeah.
Yes. But I think like if it was that, I don't know, he's kind of a down to earth person too. But if whatever person it was, and there's times where I say, I just got to tell you, I'm totally nervous because I know this is so nerdy, and I know you get this all the time, but I've admired you my whole life. And the moment's finally here, and I just don't want to blow it. And usually people respond to that like, don't worry about it, man. Like this, we got this. And then like when they say we got this, they're basically now your teammate. They're actually going to give me something that I couldn't have created if I was trying to just like act all cool. Like, oh yeah, like I'm a cool guy, and I don't. So anyway, the point being is being honest with that. As those things happen is a great way to do it,
oh geez. Yeah.
And I'm sure weddings are like that too, where, you can just, cause I'm thinking of weddings I've photographed or whatever people photograph, there's times where like something's overwhelming, just going to a wedding. It's like, hey, I got to just tell you right now, this is so overwhelming. The music is so loud right here. I feel like we're trying to create romantic pictures, but it's just so hard for me to do this. Do you guys have any thoughts? And they'll be like, I felt the same way. Let's walk over to that other tree over there, just like 20 feet away from the speaker. I know we told you beforehand we wanted it here, but let's go over there. Mm-hmm. And now you're collaborating and you win.
Yeah. So I've never personally been in that situation, but I could see how that could be beneficial. Yeah. Just because, again, it can be stressful on a wedding day, and it's always hot in the reception. And once they walk outside, they're like, "Whoa, this feels wonderful." This happened to me just 2 weeks ago, where it was outside. It was like literally sub-zero, like minus 30.
Oh my
degrees.
Gosh!
Or not minus 30 degrees, but it was 30 degrees, so it was below zero. And in the reception, it was very hot, very warm. And when I asked them to come outside, they both walked outside and like, "Oh, this is wonderful. Like, this is fantastic." And you're like, "It is below freezing right now. What do you mean this is fantastic?" But it's just that time away and their own personal experience that they bring to that, which is great. But speaking of personal experience, I got a technical question for you. And this isn't, we don't talk about this much on the podcast, but I want to talk about your switch to Sony. You talked about being an ambassador for Sony, but for years you were shooting Canon.
Yes.
So in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group, I see a lot of posts from new photographers asking, I don't like my one camera. What's the best camera setup, right?
Right.
And I think on like what they're asking them, I think what they're looking for is that they're not happy with the images that they're taking, and they're hoping that it's purely the camera's fault, and that once they switch to a new system, they'll be taking much better photos. But as a professional, or in your words, a professional amateur photographer.
I'll embrace that. And I, as the amateur thing, the word obviously means love in French, so it's like someone who loves it. But yes, go ahead. Yeah, as someone in my space.
Exactly. What goes into that decision of switching brands for you?
Yeah, that was huge for me because I had so much gear, and mostly, as all of us photographers know, you don't buy all your gear at once. So you buy the camera, and then you save up for that one and the lens, and then that one. And then eventually, years later, someone looks at your drawer full of gear and they're like, "Oh my gosh, how did you do this?" And it's like, well, it took me 10 years, or whatever. So I had all of that. And more than anything, I had this comfort, just this, I didn't like the gear. I think gear should disappear. There should be no awareness or thought process related to gear. It should just kind of become invisible, kind of become, let's just go to music. It's like the person playing the guitar isn't like, well, this is such and such a brand guitar. They're thinking musically. They're not thinking about the gear or the mic or the amp they did all that work and they know all that so intimately that by the time they're actually creating the music, they're onto the musicality of it, not onto the technical side of it. So one of the things I think about with that, and I'll answer the question in a roundabout way, is first of all, like any camera that you just walk into a store, close your eyes and hold your hand out and grab a camera is good enough. Gear right now is so amazing. It's ridiculous. So it's all good enough. And this is true of all the mobile phones we've had at this place. My kids have old mobile phones, but they're still good enough. Those have still captured images that have been published in National Geographic and our museums. So gear is good enough. Let's just get that out of the way. Then second, I think it really is about finding something that you feel sort of connected to in the same way. Let's go to guitars for a second. And imagine if you don't play the guitar. Imagine you go to the guitar shop and there's a wall with 30 guitars on it. They all kind of look the same. And they're acoustic guitars. They basically have 6 strings. They have different sort of shapes. They have different wood they're made out of. But what happens with guitarists is they'll pick up guitars and they'll play a song on it and you'll trade another one. And then they'll kind of find one where they're like, wow, I can't quite articulate why, but I like this one. And so I think with camera gear, I'm kind of a non-technical person when it comes to gear. I'm asking, do I like it? Does it feel right? And obviously it has to be technically amazing. Obviously image quality is crazy important. All those kind of things are in there. And so part of it for me, it took me, I think, almost 3 years to make the switch.
Wow. Yeah.
A lot of people make the switch like overnight. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I had 2 cameras, and then I kind of got to the tipping point and eventually kind of sold everything off and went to the other thing, or went to Sony. But so anyway, the reason I'm saying that is if you're considering making a switch, don't feel the need to rush it. Rent something, test it, because everything is different in your hand than it is online. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter how many reviews you read. There's always the negative reviews. There's always the positive. You just have to experience that. And then what it is for me, kind of getting to the brass tacks, why the heck would I switch? Going mirrorless means I can shoot backlight and not fry my eyes. And I love backlight. And people who shoot backlight without mirrorless means they're actually magnifying the sun into their eye, even if they just catch the edge of the sunshine and they're not directly backlight. And that's really bad for your eyes. So on a mirrorless camera, you're looking at an LCD screen. And so you could literally point the camera straight at the sun and it wouldn't affect your eyes as long as you had one eye closed and one eye on the camera.
The other eye,
you know what I mean? Yeah,
totally.
Sun, which is the way most of us shoot, I think. Yeah. Good point. So that I love, and then the size, and then the other thing is the focus. What I found, I got really good at shooting shallow, and I like shallow depth of field. And with Canon, I think I could get probably 2 or 3 out of 10 shots tack sharp when I'm shooting it really, really shallow depth of field. And now with my Sony stuff, I mean, this sounds exaggerated, but 9 or 10 out of 10 shots are sharp, and I actually don't even focus anymore. And it first, it was so disappointing. I mean, this is so funny, but because it took me a decade to get really good at focusing and in portraiture. Because when you're photographing people, it's all about the eyes for me, and you have this little teeny slice of focus. So I earned it. Like, I had this skill, and then when I went to Sony, I was like, that skill's irrelevant. Like that. Like, come on, you guys. Kind of like, I was like the guy who's like, when I was in school, I used to walk both, uphill both ways. Now you kids ride electric scooters or you ride snowmobiles. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I was like, but then once I got over that initial ego element, where it's like loss of ego there, I was like, this is actually a paradigm shift for me, because there have been times where my emotion, I'm really, let's say like I've mentioned, I cried after a photo shoot or something really intense is happening. I can sort of trust my camera even when I can't quite see clearly, or I can allow things to happen that I couldn't before, and I can compose in new ways than I can. I know there's different ways, people like back button focus or different things, but now basically there's freedom, and freedom can be dangerous because you're like, well, I can do anything I want. But I sort of learned, oh, this is kind of soulful. And so back to the guitar, like you hear the strum of the guitar, I'm like, oh, this resonates. I like this. And it doesn't, I am an ambassador, and so I am biased. So got to say all that. But when I first shot Sony, I put tape over all of my cameras. I've always done that over the logos and stuff.
Yeah.
And then now I've been at a few Sony events, and they're like, Chris, why do you always cover up our name? And I'm like,
you're like, you should be talking about us.
Yeah. I'm like, well, I don't know. It's like an old, because journalists used to do that. My old journalist friends, because then people ask you about the camera, and they're getting into the camera. And in a portrait shoot, almost every time in the shoot, I hand my camera to the subject. I'll be like, hey, can you hold this while I tie my shoe? Or I set it on the ground. And I do that because I don't want them to think, this is a $5,000 piece of equipment that I need to be afraid of, which it really is. But I just want, it's just this kind of this thing we're using, and it doesn't really matter. I'm trying to belittle the significance of that. But either way, that's why I did it. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. And it's been happy, and I feel like I'm part of a community and a family in a way I've never have before. And I say all of that too with people, to never say someone else needs a switch. Mm-hmm. Because the worst thing in the world with all of this camera stuff online now is people are so discontent. The new version comes out, they're like, oh. Or someone else hypes some other camera system, and they're like, oh, I don't have that. And the reality is that's just noise. And and it's all, remember I started, it's all good enough. And it's all great enough. And the goal, I think, as a photographer is to say, rather than say that if then, well, if I had that, then I could do something great. It's like, you know what? I only brought one lens with me, and it's a 35, and I want to do portrait. I don't like 35 for portraits personally, but I'm going to lean into that. I mean, because what are my options? Like, wish I had a different camera, wish I had a different lens, wish it, that thinking doesn't work. I like the Picasso thing, the quote where he said, if I don't have red, I use blue. And I think that's one of the most profound things he's ever said.
Wow. If I don't have red, I use blue.
Yeah. Which is, as photographers, we think, well, if only, the wardrobe was a little different, or if only the light was a little better, but I think the artists out there, they're like, oh, it's red. Red, I ran out of red, I'll use blue. Or, and I think that's why you can hand a camera to people who are really good photographers. Doesn't matter the brand, make, model, anything. And I've been around some of those people. Like Chris Burkhart's one of them. I've hung out with him. He's a adventure travel photographer. And I've been standing where he's standing, and I'm just like, I have no idea how the heck he created that. And in the situation, say with his phone, I have the same phone he has, so we're equal in that way, but he somehow instinctively and intuitively and quickly tapped into something I completely overlooked. So anyway,
Wow.
so gear is good. It's great. It's fun. The other thing I will say with gear too, because I try to not get people too into the whole gear race, is that gear can also ignite a fire. Like, remember I said in the beginning, when I got my camera, the momentous moment. And so that happens to me. Like, when I get a new lens, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to kind of step up my game, because this lens is a really good lens. And we all know you can make really horrible pictures with really expensive gear.
Oh, very much so. Yes.
Yeah. And so you kind of have to like raise to the challenge. Like, this lens is calling me to step up my game. Like, I don't know 35 very well. I better figure this out. I better figure out where this breaks, where this falls apart, how close I can get, how far away, how high, how low, how everything. So anyway, I do think gear can really ignite a fire if someone is in a doldrum, and if they are completely stuck, gear can help. I'm not advocating that you go out and buy everything you want. Too much gear too quickly is the worst thing you can do for yourself as a photographer. But sometimes a single piece of gear, like I'm considering getting a GoPro. I don't like GoPros. I don't like that super wide angle lens. But for some reason, I have this instinct that I need to learn how to shoot ultra wide, and with a small format, with not being able to see the image. It's equivalent maybe of someone picking up a film camera if they've never shot film, and they're like, it's like, it teaches you things that you won't know what you learn until after you go through the experience.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, imagine like if I said, okay, here's your challenge. I'm giving you a GoPro, go shoot your next wedding. And you would work harder in preparation for that. And I would say, in this wedding, it's going to be televised, and it's going to be in People magazine, and it's a huge budget. And you have one GoPro, and you would just
hopefully 2 or 3 dozen batteries.
Yeah, you have battery, you have all the supplies you want, but just the only camera lens combo you have is this. I imagine it would ignite a fire in you that would just be absolutely crazy. And there's no guarantee anything would turn out, but I guarantee you would learn a lot.
Oh man,
from that experience.
Quite a challenge. In fact,
could you imagine that? What if you had to do that?
Oh,
it would be horrible.
As somebody who loves GoPro, the GoPro is probably one of my favorite cameras, only because it removes me from the equation of photography.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this plenty of times on the podcast. Whenever I go on vacation, the only camera that I'll bring is my GoPro, because I don't look at the camera.
Okay.
I just turn it on. I turn it on to burst mode, so it'll take 3 photos in a second, or 5 photos in 2 seconds, I believe. I'll just take the picture whenever something is happening. Later on, I choose the decisive moment, and then that's it. I was still there with my kids. I had fun, and I'm willing to take that hit of image quality, even though right now the image quality is fantastic. But I'm willing to take that bit of a hit to be able to enjoy more of that time with my kids. But as far as a wedding goes, I've learned a lot of the limitations of a GoPro, and you're right. I would, I would prepare for weeks and weeks.
And you do test shoots, and you would do, you know what I mean? And
nonstop.
And so that's where I think too with gear, I know we're going a little exaggerated with the GoPro, but for someone listening, if they're kind of thinking about gear, think about it, not just the excitement of it's shiny and it's new and it's well reviewed, but just say, like, what is this piece of gear going to teach me? And then I think when that box shows up and you unbox it, you have to ask yourself that question, why is this in my life, and what is it going to teach me? Because it's going to teach you something if you're willing to listen to it. If you kind of are like, well, I got this figured out and I know, and I'm going to go kind of impose my will on it, you won't really get to know a lens or a camera very well. But I think if you step back and say, wow, it taught me, the 85 taught me I really like to work up close. But you know what? This is a true story. I was talking to a friend about this, that I was saying, I feel like I'm stuck in my photography. So my friend's name is Katrine Eisman. And I just need to figure out how to grow. And we were at this photography event, and she said, well, Chris, here's the deal. It's so obvious. You love the 85. You always shoot up close. Your up close stuff's amazing. It's in all your books. Everyone loves it. But you need to think like a cinematographer. You need to have the scene setting shot, which is pulled back, the mid-level shot, and then the up close shot. You're just missing 2 of the 3 shots. And I thought, oh my gosh, you are, I mean, like it's so obvious, but then I did what she said and my results just went through the roof. And part of that meant I had to change my gear because you can't shoot a wide angle scene setting shot with an 85. I mean, you can step back far away, but eventually just too narrow of an angle of view, right?
Yes.
So, so anyway, ask yourself, what is this gear going to teach me? And then, maybe back to the guitarist or something. Sometimes you get a lens and you realize what it taught me is I actually don't like this lens or this camera. That's okay.
Yes.
Part ways. I think some of us feel this burden of ownership of like, well, it costs so much. And it's like, as artists, sometimes you make expensive mistakes. Like I'm going to lose $400 because I'm going to have to sell it used. But this just isn't for me. And I've had to make those mistakes. Hopefully you rent it beforehand. Hopefully you don't have to do that. But we've all done it, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing, unfortunately, with renting, and I am a huge advocate for renting, is that at some point you just don't have enough time with something to truly learn, what it can do. But I will say that when I first started shooting weddings, it was with zoom lenses.
Okay.
Because I thought, I was like, the 24-70 2.8, like that's the wedding lens that you got to have. And I was the laziest photographer in the world because I just zoomed into everything. I didn't move my feet.
Yeah.
And after that first wedding, I was like, nope, and sold it immediately. My wife was like, you just bought this lens.
Right.
And I was like, I know, but I'm going primes. I got to shoot primes. And that's what I did because I figured out that it wasn't right for me. But at the same time, I've rented other zoom lenses that I've thought, what am I doing shooting primes? This is so versatile. And I can, I can get so much more. It just all comes down to time.
It does. And I also think too, Matisse, the painter, later in his life, he was in a wheelchair and he would put his brushes on these huge long poles and he would paint these big pieces sitting in his wheelchair. And then he couldn't do that anymore. So he went to paper cutouts and he used scissors and he cut out paper and created these beautiful pieces. I actually like some of his cutouts more than his paintings. But what I love about that is how he adapted. And what I mean by that is at different ages, we're able to physically carry different camera gear, or maybe the primes like right now are great for you, or for me for that matter. But let's just say, I don't know, I break my ankle and I need that to be able to zoom in and zoom out because I'm not as mobile, or I need a really light, small camera. I think the people who create great work are like, that's okay. I'm gonna adapt to this stage in my life, and that's another reason these mirrorless cameras are so nice. I can have this powerful kit that's really small and light, and shoot certain ways. And so I think as we navigate through our arc as human beings and as people, and responding to that either emotionally, because sometimes emotionally it's like I am up close, I like want to be right there. But then for me, sometimes I'm like, I am so overwhelmed with all this up close work I've done.
Yeah.
It's like, it's almost like eating something that's really good, but just too much of it. It's healthy food, but it's like, you can only eat so many blueberries or I don't know, something like that. It's like, I need to step back. And so I need to change my gear and respond to that. And so coming up with this kind of emotional, intimate relationship with gear is what I found makes photographers really good, rather than having this relationship based on the latest reviews, the latest YouTube videos, and the excitement surrounding just with gadgetry and buying stuff. Because that's important. Buying a guitar that's well made is important. But the question is, can you create something that's musical and beautiful and expressive? And so if we can apply that musical analogy to our camera gear, it can help out. At least that's my take.
Yeah. It all goes back to kind of figuring out who it is that you are as a person, and how you shoot a scene and what it is that you like. And unfortunately, YouTube reviews aren't going to tell you what it is that you like. YouTube reviews aren't going to tell you, what's right for you. And it just does take that personal experience. So before I let you go, I've kept you forever.
No, we're going to keep talking all day.
I wish I could, but I got my 7-year-old is not going to be happy if I don't show up to pick him up from school.
Yes.
So I want to know from you though, what is the one thing in 2020 that new photographers who are listening right now should really focus on if they want to start taking better portraits?
Yeah, I would say the one thing that will kind of catapult your growth or career or vocation or hobby or whatever it is to photograph people that matter to you. And the trick with photography, there's a myth that I like to try to dispel, which is some teachers will say, if you want to capture more interesting photographs, stand in front of more interesting things. I think that works some of the time, but it's a little bit misplaced in the sense that in portraiture, if you want to get good at portraiture and you've never captured a portrait of your dad, you need to do that. Or of your daughter, or of your best friend, or of that person you see every day that serves your coffee, that has all these earrings and tattoos. You need to take that risk because this is someone you've known for a decade and you care about, and they care about you, and you're going to somehow create that picture. So if you want to capture more interesting portraits, take photographs of people that matter to you. There's a greater chance that they will then matter to someone else, and try to resist the urge to go the easy route and photograph people that have some kind of a dramatic look. That's what we tend to think. Someone gets into it and they're like, whoa, my so-and-so. And it's like, yes, do that. That's fine. But photographing, let's say, an Ironman triathlete who's really muscular and handsome and striking, it's not gonna, you're not gonna learn as much, and it's not gonna be as good of a picture compared to you photograph your brother. And because that's going to be awkward and hard and interesting and all those things. So that would be my one tip is photograph people that inspire you, that you admire, that you care about, and that will then, all that care will show up in those frames. And I think people will sense and feel that, and it can be a great way to grow and learn.
Wow, geez. All of a sudden, I'm thinking about all the people who I want to photograph here in 2020, and just really make a difference. Chris, man, thank you so much for coming on and sharing so much about your journey and how it is that you, as I said in the intro, how you capture the essence of a human within a single photograph. So again, I just have to say thank you so much for coming on. But before I let you go, can you share with the listeners where they can find you and more of your work online?
Yeah. And thank you too. Thanks for keeping me on track. And sorry, I've gone on all these tangents and stuff, and I'll look forward to hanging out when we're at that conference, and capturing a portrait of you too. We'll have to do we'll do some dueling portraits, but just my name, which is Chris, and then Orwig, Orwig. That's what I use for Instagram, my website, Facebook, all those things. So that's really easy. And I have a new book that's come out, which I'm really proud of, called Authentic Portraits, we mentioned. So if you do a search for that at any of the online bookstores or at your local bookstore, you can find it there. And yeah, thanks a ton. This was fun. I feel like we've been friends for years, and this is a great way to start a friendship. I look forward to the future ahead. Let's hang out some more. And thanks to those of you who listened as well. If you want to reach out, you can do so by Instagram or my website. And I love connecting with people who have a passion for photography. And any way I can help or share, I love to be able to do that. So thanks for listening. Appreciate it.
I got to tell you, I already look forward to having Chris on again in the future so that we can finish our conversation with all the questions that I wasn't able to get to because we simply ran out of time. It was just so much fun to chat. So Chris, if you're listening, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing so much. Not only about your early days in photography, but how you approach life and your portraits. So again, thank you. For the listeners, I want to know what your biggest takeaway was from this interview. Me personally, my biggest takeaway was when Chris said that the camera is simply an instrument for capturing wisdom. Simply an instrument for capturing wisdom. That right there kind of made me pay attention. Like, whoa, what does that mean? And I think you can tell that Chris just has a genuine curiosity for his subjects. And that is what makes him able to really see who his subjects are and capture them correctly, And one of the great things about that is that you can do that. That is a skill that you can develop. curiosity is a skill that you can harness and bring into your photography. It's not just something that you're born with. And remember, earlier in the interview, Chris said that he looked back at his early work from high school and it was not good. And he is not naturally a talented photographer, and he has had to work on his craft continually to get to where he is today. So can you. So can I. So I want you to share your biggest takeaway with me in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group, and I really look forward to hearing it from you. So that is it for this week. Until next week, I want you to get out. I want you to keep shooting. I want you to stay safe. And I want you to focus on yourself. So that's it. I love you all.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a review in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. And continue the conversation with Raymond and other listeners of the podcast by joining the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group today. Thank you. We'll see you again next week.